Why do underground railway stations become abandoned? Maybe the upkeep is too much and the costs cannot be met. Wars and depression can also add to the upkeep due to lack of funds. In other cases, people preferred cars to trains. Some of these stations were built as works of art in themselves, and it's sad to see their demise. The following 10 stations each have their story to tell, where the once grandiose designs now lie in ruins. Number 11. CANFRANC International Railway Station. Known as one of the largest and most glamorous railway stations in the world, the CANFRANC International Railway Station was the height of elegance in its day. Nestled in the Pyrenees Mountains and situated on the Spanish side of the border, the station opened its doors in 1928. Many wealthy travellers would marvel at the stylish CANFRANC architecture. At the beginning of World War II, the railway was used as a safe haven for Jewish refugees fleeing occupied Europe. However, its occupation was soon taken over by the Spanish dictator Franco. He proudly showcased the station to Hitler, resulting in Germany taking control of the station. The Nazis used the station to transport tons of looted gold, and at the end of World War II, the same trains that had once helped thousands of Jews flee the Holocaust were used by the Nazi war criminals to evade capture. The station returned to normal use during the 1950s and 60s, and was even used as a set in the movie Dr. Zhivago. However, this once grand station was soon left abandoned and forgotten after a large locomotive accident. The station has since fallen prey to vandals, leading to crumbling walls and disrepair. Finally, while the CANFRANC railway station may look long gone and forgotten, its old tunnels were rejuvenated in 1985. Spanish physicists have assessed that CANFRANC would be the perfect site for an underground astroparticle laboratory, and it is currently in use in studies to unlock the mysteries of dark matter. Number 10. City Hall Loop, New York, New York. City Hall Loop was the original southern terminal of the first line of the New York City subway, which opened on October the 27th, 1904, and is located underneath the public area in front of City Hall. It was designed to be the showpiece of the new subway. The platform and mezzanine feature amazing Castellino tiles, skylights and coloured glass tiles, and brass chandeliers. The station was built on a curve and could only accommodate 5-car trains, which proved to be inefficient as subway ridership grew. Due to the infrastructural shortfalls as well as proximity, the nearby Brooklyn Bridge station, passenger service was discontinued on December 31st, 1945. This beautiful structure lay dormant for 50 years until 1995, when federal grant money was sought to reopen the station as a branch of the New York Transit Museum, which occasionally ran tours of the station. Unfortunately, museum tours ceased in late 1998 as the station was declared a security risk due to overseas terrorist bombings by the Giuliani administration, and plans for a museum annex were abandoned and museum tours ceased. So yet again, this wonderful piece of work became dormant. Number 9. CHAMBERI Station, Madrid, Spain. Designed by the architect Antonio Palacio, it was opened in October 1919. It was one of the original 8 stations that served Madrid's first metro line. This was the first such project in Spain, and the architect was inspired by the look of the Parisian stations at the time. The architect used bright, colourful materials in the hallways, tunnels, passages, and platform finishes, extensively using tiles and other white and cobalt blue ceramic pieces. In the 1960s, due to increased passenger traffic, it was decided to upgrade Metro Line 1 to allow commissioning new trains with greater capacity, up to 6 cars. To accommodate this, the platforms of all stations needed to be expanded. but given the technical impossibility of extending CHAMBERI station and its proximity to those of two other main stations, the Ministry of Public Works decided to close it in 1966. The station remained unused for over 40 years, and external access had been bricked up, conserving much of the everyday objects of the time, such as billboards, turnstiles, and even paper money. But unfortunately, the station would eventually be vandalised. In August 2006, restoration work began with a view to turning its facilities into a museum, and in March 2008, it was reopened. Number 8. Waldorf Astoria train platform, New York, New York. The Waldorf Astoria platform is not exactly a train station of its own, which was built atop one of Grand Central terminals and was constructed from 1903 to 1913. This now barren subterranean space once served as a means to discreetly transport the hotel's more famous guests, like General Pershing, who first allegedly used the platform in 1938. The most famous story about the Waldorf Astoria platform features President Roosevelt, in which he used it to transfer himself into an employed custom-made train cart to apparently hide the fact that he used a wheelchair. The vehicle would commute him straight to a hotel and was armoured for his protection, and that his train car is still on the platform. Another famous story is that the platform also served as an underground party space for Andy Warhol in 1965. Today the platform is unused and is restricted to any passenger service and is blocked to visitors. Number 7. Aldwych Tube Station, London, England. Aldwych is a closed station on the London Underground, located in central London. It was opened in 1907, originally under the name of Strand. Served mostly by a shuttle train and having low passenger numbers, the station and branch were considered for closure several times. Service was offered only during weekday peak hours from 1962 and discontinued in 1994 when the cost of replacing the lifts was considered too high for the income generated. Parts of the station and the running tunnels were used during both World Wars to shelter artworks from London's public galleries and museums from bombing. The station has long been popular as a filming location and has appeared as itself and as other London Underground stations in a number of films. In recognition of its historical significance, the station is a Grade 2 listed building, which means it is protected. Number 6. Botanic Gardens Station, Glasgow, Scotland. The station was opened on the 10th of August 1896 by the Glasgow Central Railway. The station building was on ground level and the platforms were underground beneath the Glasgow Botanic Gardens. It was closed between the 1st of January 1917 and the 2nd of March 1919 due to wartime economy, and closed permanently to passengers on the 6th of February 1939, with the line being closed on the 5th of October 1964. The station building was an ornate red brick structure, with two towers sporting a clock and a Caledonian Railway monogram, topped by domes reminiscent of a Russian Orthodox church. The building was converted into shops after the station's 1939 closure, and by the late 1960s was occupied by a popular cafe, a nightclub called Sgt. Pepper's, and later a plumber's shop. It was damaged by fire in 1970. The site of Botanic Gardens Station remains derelict to this day. More than 40 years after the fire, the platforms still remain underground, where they can be seen from above through still open air vents in the Botanic Gardens, and the floor of the building is still visible within the fenced-off section of the gardens, marking where it stood. The platforms are accessible via the tunnel portal of the Kirkley end of the gardens. An abandoned tramway kiosk designed in the same style as the building and built in 1903 is still present at the site. The site is heavily overgrown, vandalised and dilapidated, and is considered dangerous to enter, and there are no current plans to redevelop the site. Number 5. The Chicago Tunnel Company. Starting in 1899, the Illinois Telephone and Telegraph Company dug under most of downtown Chicago, creating nearly 62 miles of tunnels, 6 feet wide by 7.5 feet tall. Their original intention was to house telephone cables, but the company also installed tracks to make getting around easier. Spotting an opportunity, they renamed their business the Chicago Tunnel Company in 1906 and became an underground delivery service. At their peak use, the tunnels moved around 150 small locomotives, hauling 3,300 miniature train cars that delivered 600,000 tonnes of freight every day. Using special elevators connected to the tunnels, businesses like Marshall Fields would get new clothing and shoe shipments from the rail, but delivering coal for furnaces was the company's bread and butter. However, by the late 1940s, most buildings were using natural gas for heat, and those still using coal were getting it by truck, which was much cheaper. Business declined until the company went bankrupt and the tunnels were sealed in 1959. Shortly after, scrap metal thieves cleaned out the tunnels, including steel doors that were meant to close off the passageways that ran under the Chicago River. The rails were virtually forgotten until 1992, when a pile driver in the Chicago River hit a freight train tunnel wall. A small crack eventually became a 20-foot hole, allowing over 100 million gallons of water to flood the tunnels. Many downtown buildings still had basement connections to the railway, so as the water rose underground, it flooded those buildings too, ruining stock in storage rooms, shutting down the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and Board of Trade, and shorting out electrical power for blocks. Days later, the hole was repaired and the water was pumped out. The cleanup cost and estimated damage to downtown business was more than $1 billion. Since then, many sections of the tunnel have been closed off while other branches have come full circle. They're once again being used to house telecommunication wires, and maybe in the near future they will again use it to again move goods instead of blocking streets with all those delivery trucks. Number 4. Paris Metro. The Paris Metro, beautifully decorative and influenced by Art Nouveau, is not as extensive as London's Tube but serves more stations, 300 in total. So it's hardly surprising that a few ghost stations lurk on the network. Most of the Paris ghost stations were closed at the outset of World War II. Many never reopened, while others like St. Martin had a brief resurgence before falling into abandonment, fostering a sense of mystery over Parisians, second only to the Paris catacombs in terms of urban exploration. In some cases, like Victor Hugo and Porte de Versailles stations, platforms were moved to accommodate longer trains, leaving older ones abandoned. In others, entire stations were deserted or relocated and now stand silent, but not forgotten, beyond heavy iron gates. Some stations, including the old terminus of Gare du Nord, closed in 1942, have been returned to use as training stations for student drivers. Number 3. Lower Bay, Toronto. Opened in 1954 with 4 lines and 69 stations, the Toronto subway isn't as old, extensive or busy as those of London, Paris and New York, but still boasts several abandoned stations. The most famous is an abandoned platform beneath the existing Bay station known as Lower Bay. Opened in 1966, this platform was only active for 6 months while interline service trials were performed. The experiment was deemed a failure, largely because delays anywhere quickly cascaded to affect the entire system. Also, as the stations had not been laid out effectively for cross-platform interchange, trains travelling east from St George and west from Yonge alternated between the 2 levels, leading passengers to wait on the stairs in between the levels since they were unable to tell which platform would receive the next train, causing a sort of confusion. Abandoned for 45 years, Lower Bay has been used in movies like Don't Say a Word and Johnny Mnemonic. Considered a holy grail of urban exploration, one entrance has recently been bricked up and security cameras installed. Even so, Lower Bay Station was briefly opened to the public in 2007, 2008 and 2010, for the first time since 1966. Number 2. The Cincinnati subway. During the first part of the 20th century, Cincinnati was one of the largest cities in the country, with a growth rate nearly the same as Chicago and New York City. Unlike those cities, Cincinnati had a problem with dangerous busy streets. So in 1916, a 60-mile mass transit system was proposed to alleviate the congestion. The project included above-ground and underground rails, with much of the latter to be constructed by tearing up the Miami and Erie Canal, a man-made waterway that had fallen into disuse. $6 million in bonds were approved in April 1916, but America had entered World War I just 11 days before, and the federal government soon put a freeze on all bond issues. When the war was over, the price of steel and concrete had skyrocketed, so the original $6 million was now insufficient. A modified plan eliminated some of the original 17 stations and cut the track down to 6 miles, servicing only the western half of the city. With the new plan, construction began in 1920 and lasted until 1925, when the $6 million ran out. During that time, 2 miles of 26-foot wide subway tunnels were built, where the canal had been, and then covered by a new street, Central Parkway, creating a major thoroughfare for above-ground traffic. Until more money could be raised, there were no tracks or train cars, but the infrastructure was in place for the subway's eventual completion. While city governments argued over what to do next, the stock market crashed in 1929. World War II stalled the project, and by the 1950s, America was in love with its automobiles, so the demand for mass transit dried up. Today, the tunnel sits unused and unfinished for nearly 85 years. The entrance to the grand staircase that leads to the tunnel has been closed, and most of the above-ground stations have been torn down. There's really very little evidence that the tunnel even exists, which is perfectly fine to some people embarrassed by the project's history. Over the years, there have been numerous attempts to find some use for the tunnel, but none have been successful. In 2002, a proposal for mass transit was again considered, but the idea was voted down. Number 1. Rochester Subway, New York. Active from 1927 to 1956, the Rochester Subway, officially called Rochester Industrial and Rapid Transit Railway, was more successful than its counterpart in Cincinnati, but not much. Adapted from the abandoned Erie Canal, the Rochester Subway ran single streetcars with interurban lines routed into the tunnels to ease traffic congestion on the streets above. But the rise of the car put the last nail in the subway's coffin, and it has stood abandoned for more than half a century. The line was operated on a contract basis by New York State Railways until Rochester Transit Corporation took over in 1938. The last day of passenger service was June the 30th, 1956. Portions of the right-of-way were used for expressway construction, while the rest was abandoned and filled in over the years. The largest remaining section is a stretch of underground tunnel under Broad Street, from Exchange Street to the intersection of Court Street and South Avenue. The centre of much controversy, Laurie Mercer described the subway as either a giant hole waiting to be filled with dirt or an impressive asset in a city that needs to revitalise its downtown. After spending $1.2 million a year to maintain the tunnels, city officials finally decided to fill some of them in, despite their potential value to the city. Work began in 2010 at an estimated cost of $60 million.